Okay, let's see. Nice. Okay, looks like we are live. Let's see, I just gotta share the link. And to Gundam it, Convergence, one of my buddies, Inquisition, and Keyboard Decision.
Ah, I got firebombed. Ooh, they don't like me. They want to firebomb my ass.
At any rate,
Bitch!
okay.
Don't fly low to the ground with cannons. Oh!
Okay. Anyways. Hello, everybody. It's Phoenix Destiny again, back with another Mobile Suit Corner stream. That being said, though, I have a bit of a preface to say. So here goes. For any Mobile Suit lines I discuss starting with this video and future broadcasts, any weapons that are not part of GB4 along with specific body styles and abilities, or even the existence of the suit period, will merely be referenced but not discussed. Such as me not being able to have the Strike's bazooka in this game for whatever reason. Also, some Mobile Suit lore may be incomplete due to a lack of knowledge on my part, usually because I haven't experienced it yet or I don't really have good mediums to discuss it with, or simply due to my medium for how I make these videos, as I wish to get a better setup in the future. So that way my videos could be more professional instead of just being raw footage. That being said, viewer discretion is advised, and please leave comments when possible. That being said, as far as the topic of today's Mobile Suit Corner, honestly, I haven't done one in a while, and I've been wanting to do this lately because I've been finding myself having a bit of a resurgence with Gundam Seed lately, so I figured, why not start it off with one of my favorite modular suits, the Strike Gundam. And one thing I will go ahead and say about this line, there is so many variations of this line. So the only ones I will be able to discuss in length is pretty much the ones that's in this game. That being said, let me go ahead and pull out the base version of it because it's kind of where I want to kick this off. Because, well, for those watching, this may also be a spoiler if you've never watched Gundam Seed. Anyways, let's get started. So, the Strike Gundam. The year is Cosmic Era 71. Tensions have been running pretty much for quite a long time between the Earth Alliance and Zeft, mainly due to actions of, well, one Maruda Azrael. But that's for another day. The important thing is, as a result, kind of a mirror to Universal Century, there was a lot of weapons that was being used before the first mobile suits would come out, that being Jin. And eventually, the Earth Alliance, in collaboration with Morganrate, decided to make their own line of mobile suits to specifically counter the Zaf Jins. And as a result, there was several suits that was cranked out. The Duel, the Buster, the Blitz, and the Aegis, and the topic of today's discussion, the Strike Gundam. As far as how this thing was rolled out, well, as it turns out, I don't know if there was an intended pilot for the Strike Gundam, but as it just so happened, these weapons was resting on the colony known as Heliopolis. And because Rallacrusade got impatient because he figured whoever moves first wins, he basically led a raid team onto the colony to try to get the mobile suits. And his team was successful in stealing 4 of the 5 suits, and it would have been all 5 were it not for the fateful meeting of one Kira Yamato and Athrun Zala. Anyways, with the help of the eventual commander of the Archangel Maru Ramius, Kira hops inside of this thing, and initially he has a hard time controlling it because the OS for this suit was absolute garbage. Like, it was meant for the use of naturals, but unfortunately, because, well, he's a coordinator, and one of the better ones on top of that, he had to reconfigure the system to basically fit himself. So within the span of, like, I want to say 1 minute or so, he basically just inputted a bunch of commands, and he basically created the OS to move the Strike Gundam. Now, initially, and this is where I get into the suit proper, initially this thing didn't have any weapons. Like, all it really had was the head Vulcans and a pair of knives known as the Armor Schneiders. But against the Zaf Jin, it did a pretty good job. Hell, the very first sortie he went against was a guy that goes by the name of Miguel. He basically clowns on him because, as Miguel found out the hard way, one thing I have to go ahead and say right here, right now, about a unique ability that each, or should I say armor, that each of the 5 Gundams had, they had something that's known as phase shift armor. Think of it like this. Basically, in Universal Century, Grandpa Gundam was basically able to shrug off Zaku bullets because that armor was so freaking strong. This is basically an homage to that. But it works a bit different. Phase shift armor basically negates... Well, in anime, it's basically supposed to shrug off any type of physical impact, projectile or melee otherwise. But in a lot of media, it's often shown as like a pretty good defense against physical projectiles or attacks, period. And the thing is, when the battery would run out for this thing, the color for the Gundam would actually appear to be a metallic gray. This is pretty much what the suit will look like when the phase shift armor is active. So it's pretty much a cool signifier of why the Gundams have their colors. Anyways, but as far as the Strike Gundam itself, the thing is, the reason why I like the Strike Gundam is... Let me move the camera around a bit. Now, the thing of it is, this is one of very few mobile suits that do not need a backpack to fly. This could basically fly under its own weight, as you can see. But the thing of it is, the reason why the Strike was particularly special amongst the 5 suits is because this was modular. This could have different types of configurations for different type of situations. As far as, well, when the Strike rolled out again, it didn't have any configurations. Like, it didn't even have any ranged weapons or anything. All it just had was the head Vulcans, and again, the Armor Schneiders. Now, that being said, let me go and pull out some of these configurations, because some of them are actually some of my personal favorites. And while I'm getting this out, the thing of it is, supposedly there was even a way that these 5 suits were meant to work in tandem. The Blitz was basically meant to be a hit-and-run suit because it utilized an ability known as Mirage Calloid, which basically was just optical camouflage armor. Well, not armor, but optical camouflage. The Buster was basically your artillery unit. The Duel was your jack-of-all-trades, master of none. And the Aegis was meant to be a mobile armor type mobile suit that could basically go against the Earth Alliance's Mobius units. And as far as the Strike Gundam, it was meant to utilize different types of backpacks and different types of weaponry for just about any situation that you could think of. And as far as the most recognizable of all those forms, say hello to the Ale Strike. The Ale Strike is basically meant to be a striker pack configuration that would let the strike fight in space or even in atmosphere because it actually had pretty good thrust capabilities with its verniers. The thing is, anybody who knows Gundam Seed and anybody who knows a Strike Gundam knows this configuration. You could say that pretty much until the Freedom Gundam came in existence, this is basically the mascot for Gundam Seed. So, right off the bat, let me go ahead and show off some of its features. It still has the armor Schneiders mounted in the legs, just as like a backup weapon this time. But, obviously because of this configuration and the weapons that it came with, well, it's kind of standard for what you would expect with a Gundam. It has a beam rifle, it has a beam saber, and it has a couple of backpack mounted beam sabers, like so. The thing is, this is one of 3 forms that the Strike Gundam could take. Let me go ahead and pull out a couple of the other forms. Okay. Now, as far as this next form, I do like the Ale Strike, but of the 3 forms, this one is my personal favorite of the 3, the Sword Strike. Now, this was basically the configuration that Kira would use if he wanted to get up close and personal with his opponents. And the thing of it is, as far as the type of equipment that you can see here on the left shoulder, it actually comes mounted with a boomerang known as the Midas Messer. And on his arm, he basically has an anchor shot known as the Panzereisen. And as far as the weapon of choice that you see here, basically the Buster Sword, I guess some of you could call it, this is known as the Schwertgewehr. Weirdly enough translates to Gunblade, which I don't really see this, and I'm only saying this as a Final Fantasy VIII fan. But no, this was meant to be an anti-ship sword, and this did its job rather well, as one Blitz pilot found out the hard way. Like, the thing of it is, for all intents and purposes, this was not meant to be used for anti-mobile suit combat, but because Kira used it to such a lethal effect, it produced some pretty good results. As far as its weapons, well, it still had the head Vulcans, but on top of that, like I said, it also had the boomerang. The Minas Messer basically works as a boomerang, or an alternate beam saber, as Shin from Sea Destiny would showcase, because there were similar weapons. And you have your anchor shot. And as far as the Schwertgewehr, it's basically classified as a great sword in this game. And as you can see, this thing is capable of wide sweeping attacks. It is capable of doing lots of damage. Basically, this thing is what you wanted to use if you wanted to ship out the way and you basically couldn't access the other strike package. Now then, let me switch to the other form. And off of the Strike Gundam alone, it basically has 2 other forms, at least before the halfway point. And this is the last of the 3 configurations. Say hello to the Launcher Strike. Basically, the Sword Strike was the close combat variation of the Strike Gundam. This is basically the artillery variant. And just looking at it, it's evident why. Because first off, let me go over a few of its weapons. It basically has a 35mm gun launcher, which shoots rockets. It also has the 120mm anti-missile Vulcan cannon, basically a more powerful, well, head Vulcan, I guess you could say. And, most importantly, the nom de plume of the suit, the Agni Launcher. Basically, that thing was meant to work as an anti-ship weapon also, if Kira didn't want to go with the close combat configuration. And as a fun fact about each of the 3 different forms, Kira mainly used the Ale form if he was going against the Crusade team in space. This he actually used to rather lethal effect going against the Desert Tiger himself, Andrew Waldfeld. And as far as the Sword Strike, well, he basically used that when he was fighting the Crusade team as the Archangel was escaping from Orb, which led to Kira basically killing the pilot of the Blitz Gundam, Nickel. Now, the thing of it is, I said these were each of the 3 configurations, but what if I told you there was a combined configuration? You could say a perfect combination of the 3. And here it is. Before some other upgrades that would come into the future, this was essentially the final form of the Strike Gundam, the Perfect Strike. One thing I'm going to go ahead and say about this right now. This unit never appeared in the normal anime broadcast. This would only appear in the HD remaster, which I don't get why, but whatever. And when it was used, it wasn't used by Kira because by then he had the Freedom Gundam, but this baby was rolled out in the defense of Orb by one Mula Flaga. Basically, the Perfect Strike is a combination of the Ale, the Sword, and the Launcher forms. In other words, it has all of its abilities at once. And there's not really much else to say about that other than this thing was comparably slower than the Ale Strike due to the fact that, well, you basically had all this gear on. And as a result, as you can see here by its, I guess you could say, spine, those are basically extra fuel tanks. Because obviously this thing was going to use a lot of gas. But it lives up to its name well because any ability that you wanted from the other 3 configurations, you basically have it here. Backpack-mounted beam sabers, the Agni Launcher, and you still have the other equipments from the Sword and the Launcher packs, the Anchor Shot and the Boomerang, the Gun Launcher, and even the Vulcan Cannons. Not to mention, you could even still use the Short Gewehr on the back. Now, the thing of it is, this thing didn't have a shield because the Sword Striker's arm basically worked as a physical shield. And that's pretty much the end for that showing of the Strike. At least in that form. Now, the thing of it is, as the series would go on, Kira obviously would move on to using the Freedom Gundam. And as a result, Well, Mulaflaga took up using the strike, or the perfect strike if you watch the HD remaster. But there was other strikes out there. And the first one I actually want to bring up was actually used by, well, the Princess of Orb herself. So, say hello to the Strike Rouge. Basically, Kigali's personal version of the Strike Gundam. And one thing I'll go ahead and say is that there's not really much physical difference between the two suits other than the suit coloring. And the fact that in the anime, Kigali never used any other form of the Strike Gundam, she just pretty much used the Ale Striker configuration. But the reason why this suit actually has a, well, the reason why this suit lives up to its namesake, Rouge, is because this thing's face shift armor was actually different from the Strike Gundams in that it had an ability known as the Power Extender. Basically, this thing had a better battery than the Strike Gundam. And the thing of it is, as far as its usage would go, again, in the normal broadcast showing of both Seed and Seed Destiny, Kigali would use this both in Cosmic Era 71 and even 73 at a certain point. However, the one thing I have to point out is that, much like the Strike Gundam, this thing can make use of each one of the different striker packs. And when it comes to two specific configurations, the IWSP and the Otori variant, weirdly enough, the IWSP never appeared in the anime. The only time you will see this thing with the IWSP configuration mainly is in Gundam Breaker and G Generation games, specifically Crossrays. Let's see. Oh, wait. Actually, hold on. That wasn't where I wanted to go. Let's see. Now, then there's... Oh, yeah. And as far as the other variant that I was talking about, this is basically the variant... Actually, no, like, I have to actually show it. So the thing of it is, the reason why I'm showing off the Otori variant before the IWSP variant is, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So first off, here is the Otori version of the Strike Rouge. And yeah, as somebody is pointing out in the stream, this thing is just basically the perfect strike, but it was refined, shall we say. Basically, in the anime, this was yet another inclusion only in the HD remaster version, and it wasn't even with the Strike Rouge, it was with the Strike Gundam of all things. This is one of those moments when I honestly wish my medium was better, because I would show off a clip of that, but I can't because of, well, I'm streaming from a PS5. But anyways, as far as the equipment on this thing basically has a beam launcher, similar to the Launcher Strike. This thing also has railguns, or a railgun, on the side. It can also shoot off missiles. It also has the ability to use a large anti-ship sword. And you also have another missile variant. The thing is, with this suit, there's really not that much to say about it, because the only times I've ever seen this suit is, again, in G Generation games, Gundam Breaker games, and more more prominently, Gundam Extreme Versus. Yeah, weirdly enough, in that game, it basically says that Kigali is the pilot of this configuration, but I'm like, that was not accurate to the anime at all. It can be, let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Now, as for the other variant of the Strike Gundam, this is one I definitely have a... I guess you could say I have a fond memory with this one. Because, again, this one never appeared in the anime. Say hello to the IWSP variant of the Strike Gundam. The thing is, this thing was basically going to be the test bed for what would eventually become the Otori. And it's, again, you can see why. This thing basically evokes the image of it, but on top of that, the only time I have ever seen this in any media is basically in the Gundam Versus games in this specific configuration with the normal Strike Gundam coloring. And, weirdly enough, in Super Robot Wars, specifically the handheld ones. But yeah, this thing doesn't really have that much beam weaponry, as somebody is pointing out in the chat. Like, this thing was mostly physical rounds. Like, obviously you still got your head Vulcans, but you also have the single cannon. You also have beam boomerangs, weirdly enough. I think it's the only beam weapon. But you also have the railguns, which is those two big cannons. And as the primary, I guess you could say... Yeah, I guess you could say as the primary for this suit, you basically have the combined shield. And as far as this close combat option, it fared a little better because it actually had swords that's kind of like the... If I had to make an analogy for what the experimental anti-vessel swords was like, think the Ifrit's heat sabers from Universal Century. And as a bit of a fun fact for Gundam Breaker fans, well, people actually used these as the Ifrit Kai's weapons before we actually got the suit in GB4. But that is not the end of the strike line for today, because there's one more notable. Well, there's actually two more notable strike variants I have to go over. Next up, say hello to the Strike Noir. It is Cosmic Era 73. While all of the events of Sea Destiny is basically happening elsewhere on the planet, another Gundam was being developed in secret, and this one was actually going to be, well, a peaceful Gundam, you could say, because this didn't have any weapons. It was known as the Stargazer Gundam. This thing was basically meant to go to the deepest reaches of outer space using its Voyager Lumiere as kind of like a solar sail. And unfortunately, when the Earth Alliance found out that the DSSD, I forget what the acronym was called, but basically, when they found out that the DSSD was making that Gundam, they sent the Phantom Pain unit out with a variant of the Duel, known as the Blue Duel, a variant of the Buster, the Verde Buster, and this thing, essentially the final strike in Cosmic Era, period. Because as far as I can tell, I don't think there was any strike variants in Seed Freedom. And as far as the Strike Noir, well, this thing basically was the strongest strike Gundam of them all, in my opinion. As far as what kind of tools this thing had, right from the get-go, people always make the comparison that this is basically an homage to Devil May Cry, and it doesn't help that the character is an homage to Dante, but mainly because this thing has beam pistols. Anybody who's played Maxi Boost on knows that this is a pain in the butt in a fight. The Rouge showed up in Freedom, but no new variants. I actually didn't know that. Probably overlooked it. But yeah, this suit has beam pistols. It also has an anchor shot. It also has the linear guns, which is just basically rail cannons. And of course, Ed Vulcans, as always. But on top of that, the way that this backpack is shaped, those things are actually melee weapons known as the Froggerrock blades. Honestly, this is a pretty cool suit. And it also came with a beam rifle as well. Though, weirdly enough, as far as I can tell, I think the primary go-to for this suit, at least for what the pilot used, was mainly just the beam pistols. At least it's what we see in Versus. And honestly, as far as why this thing is called the Strike Noir, well, it's in the color scheme. Because this thing has a lot of gray and black in it. And it was mainly because, well, this was meant to be a unit that was for a covert ops team. Honestly, I do like the Strike Noir. It's not a suit that I use that much, but it's pretty cool. And that being said, that brings us to the last Strike variant in this game. And one of yet another fond memories that I have, because the first time I ever saw this unit was actually in Gundam Versus for the PS4. And this time, we are not in Cosmic Era anymore. We are basically... Actually, I've always wondered what the time period for Build Fighters was, but we're just going to say this is the age of Gunpla. Say hello to the variant and the successor of the Strike Gundam, the Build Strike, made by one Sei Iori. This suit would get many variants later on in the Build Strike anime, or not in the Build Strike anime, but the Build Fighters anime. But this is the one that a lot of fans will recognize more often than not because, well, Gundam Versus was a thing, and also this was a Maxi Boost on. Made to basically be a strong homage to the Strike Gundam, this thing is actually pretty cool, and it's one of my more favorite of the build suits, although my personal favorite would be the Fenice line, but that's neither here nor there. As far as the weapons that this thing has a couple of waist-mounted beam sabers. It also can fire cannons out of its backpack. And something I can't really show here, but it's a pretty cool thing that was primarily seen as like a special attack in the Extreme Versus series. The backpack of this thing can also detach and launch an airstrike at an opponent. Much like the normal Strike Gundam, this thing could also fly up in the air, even without the use of a backpack. And as far as its shield, it actually is the Chobham shield, and it has a beam gun embedded in it, like so. And as far as its two primaries, this thing technically had two primaries, but not at the same time. I'm just having here both for showcase reasons. Basically, it had the typical beam rifle, but later on, when Sei wanted to ramp up the firepower of this thing, he gave it the enhanced beam rifle, as shown on the left. And all I can say is, when it comes to the Strike line honestly has a pretty good legacy in the Gundam franchise, And even throughout a lot of the media, honestly, it's a cool suit. It's modular, and it has some pretty nice paint schemes. And as far as the look of the suit itself, well, this one specifically, I actually like how, depending on how you build this, you can technically make this, I guess you could say, a base for a lot of other units that you might want to make and basically claim to be build variants. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about the Strike Gundam. And, well, its future successor, the Build Strike. It's a good line. So, my next Mobile Suit Corner, I'm actually going to go to After Colony, finally. It feels like something in between the Strike and the Freedom. You wouldn't be wrong. Future Hero says, hello, hand-to-hand strike. This isn't actually... It... Okay, so one thing I will say as a last fun fact before I have to go, initially before this thing reached this form, Sei basically could not pilot Gunpla for beans. In fact, he was having a pretty hard time going against Susumu, who used a Gion of all things, and he decided to make a wager. He basically wagered that because Susumu basically wanted to use this Gunpla for the upcoming Gunpla Battle Championship, but Sei basically felt like Susumu was rough on his kits. So he basically made a bet. Throughout all the battles, he figured this was going to be the one. This was going to be the battle that he won off of his skill alone because he had a better Gundam. And if he won, well, Susumu basically has to agree to leave him alone. But if he lost, then, well, Susumu gets to pilot this thing. And the reason why I bring up the whole hand-to-hand thing is because a friend of Sei's, a guy that goes by the name of Reiji, before he figured out how to use the beam sabers on this thing, perhaps in an homage to the start of Gundam Seed, he basically tried to go hand-to-hand against Susumu's Gion in this suit. And honestly, it was a pretty cool moment. So, yeah, that's all I really have to say. So next time on my Mobile Suit Corner, I am going to be taking a look at some suits from the After Colony time period, along with one of my personal favorites. Till next time, guys, stay safe, stay hydrated, and above all else, please like and subscribe. See ya.